Here, can you see it? Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
it works.
So, good morning. Today I'm going to talk about one characteristic that makes word recognition a remarkable feature. I'm sure that all of you have in your minds the image of table when reading all these words, regardless of difference in some visual forms like size, case, font, and color. And importantly, this fact is explained by influential hierarchical neural models of visual letter and word recognition that assume that potentially irrelevant parameters such as font, size, case, or ink are lost when mapping the visual input into abstract letter representations. So one question that necessarily arises from this fact is whether the abstract representations are purely orthographic or not. And an excellent tool to answer this question is mask priming because it taps on the early stages of letter and word processing. So in this task, a mask is presented for 500 milliseconds and then it's replaced by a prime for 50 milliseconds, so participants cannot see it, and the prime is then replaced by the target stimulus. And importantly, we can manipulate the prime-target relationship that can be related or unrelated. So the difference between the reaction times in the related and unrelated conditions is the priming effect. Thus, in order to tap the nature of the abstract letter detectors, Jacobs and others conducted a mask priming experiment in which the primes were presented in match or unmatched case with the target. Importantly, they found that lexical decision times to a word like table were similar, regardless of whether they were briefly preceded by a mask match case identity prime or a mask mismatch case identity prime. But probably the most important finding was that response to a pseudo word like sugle were faster when preceded by a mask match case identity prime, sugle, that when preceded by a mismatch case identity prime. So this finding poses some problems for a purely bottom-up accounts of visual word recognition, which will have predicted the same pattern for word and non-word targets. Importantly, this dissociation between words and pseudo-words is a reliable finding. Indeed, it has been replicated in several languages with the lexical decision task, like Spanish, French, and English. So with the aim of further examining the time course of this dissociation between words and pseudo-words, Vergara-Martínez and others registered participants' even-related potentials, ERPs, in a mask priming lexical decision experiment. So in this task, the targets were always in uppercase, and the primes, which could be identical or unrelated to the target, were presented in lowercase or in uppercase. And obviously, the target could be a word or a non-word, a pseudo word. So behavioral results replicated previous mask priming results. There was an advantage of the match case identity prime, but only for non-words. And in GRP's data, they examined 3 early measures of word recognition, that is the NP150, the N250, and the N400. And they found an effect of match versus mismatch case identity priming for both words and non-words in an early pre-lexical perceptual component. There is the NP150. Very importantly, this effect vanished for words in a component associated to the initial mapping of orthographic representations, that is the N250. And in a component related to lexical semantic activation, there is the N400. But in contrast, this difference was sizable for pseudo words both at the N250 and the N400. Thus, the word pairs produced a similar signature in the N250 and N400 components, but it was not the case for non-words. So again, this dissociation between match case and mismatch case identity priming for words and non-words in behavioral and electrophysiological measures with the lexical decision task pose strong problems for those accounts that assume the bottom-up mapping from visual features to abstract letter word representations, because these accounts will predict similar responses for both words and non-words. But instead, the ERP findings from the Vergara-Martínez and others study taken together with the previous experiments suggest that lexical feedback, which only operates for words, helps to override all the visual difference for mismatch case identity primes. Thus, we know that there is one point in processing in which there is a dissociation between words and pseudo-words, and is affected by case mismatch. So in order to deeply examine this issue, in the present experiment, we examine at what processing level occurs this dissociation in lexical decision. That is, we examine whether this dissociation is fully dependent on the orthographic representation of uppercase and lowercase stimuli, or whether it can be modulated by a lower level perceptual factor, such as color. So in the present experiment, we compare match color identity pairs and mismatch color identity pairs. We employ red and green as colors. And furthermore, to examine whether the effect of match versus mismatch color modulates with the case match effect, primes were also presented either in uppercase or in lowercase. So the predictions were as follows. If mass identity priming in lexical decisions arises on the basis of integration of abstract letter and word representations, as is commonly thought, lexical decision response will be similar for match color and mismatch color identity pairs. So there will be no difference modulated by color. Thus, one will expect a dissociation of match case versus mismatch case, but only for non-words. But alternatively, if there is a very early prelexical locus in mass identity priming, lexical decision response will be faster for match color pairs than for mismatch color pairs. So let's see. Results showed the typical lexicality effect, that is that response times were faster for words than for non-word targets. And furthermore, as in previous research, we found an interaction between lexicality and case. And this interaction reflected that for non-word targets and only for non-word targets, responses were faster in the match case than in the mismatch case condition. Whereas for word targets, there were no signs of any effect. And critically, the other effects or interactions were not significant, so we did not find an effect of color. Thus, our data suggests that the case dissociation between words and pseudo-words is fully dependent on the orthographic representation of uppercase and lowercase stimuli. Thus, it does not have a prolexical locus. That is, it arises on the basis of abstract letter and word representation. So in sum, all the data I've presented today suggests that in word recognition, there is some lexical feedback that overrides the perceptual difference of the visually presented words. For this reason, people are able to integrate house, the word house, in the first moments of processing, regardless the visual form in which the word is presented. But this does not occur for sugle. So that is all I have to tell you. Thank you, and please let me know if you have any further question.
Thank you so much. Yes, we do have time for questions. Any hands or anything in our chat? Yuri Starov, yes, has.
Yeah, maybe I can ask a brief question. It's more of a clarification request. So what would make colors involved in this case? So when we deal with shape, it's clearly a visual effect, right? When we deal with letter identity, it could be phonological or orthographic effect. Why would letter color be involved at all in expediting or doing something to lexical access? I think your mic is muted, or is that not? No.
Yes, it is muted. No,
sorry, I have problems with my computer. I don't know why, but I'm here now I'm with Anna. Yes. So can you please repeat the question?
It's more of a clarification request.
Okay.
So what would make you think that color at all, letter color, is at all involved in lexical or sublexical processing, given that we know that visual properties like letter shape, capital versus small case, letter shape is purely visual, right? And a letter identity is orthographic or phonological. But how would color? What makes you predict that color should be involved at all?
Well, I think it was not a prediction. We just wanted.
You tested it anyways, right?
Yes, we wanted just to test if this dissociation between words and pseudo words had its locus in a prelexical moment of processing. So we apply color because it's just a visual feature.
Yeah, right. Thank you.
Yeah, but we don't think that color has a role in visual word recognition.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions? Well, this is probably a side effect of this online format. Okay, thank you once again.